Today on episode 19 of the Play Guitar Podcast, I continue the path to great guitar tone with effects pedals. I look at the different types of effects and tips on what order to put them in. Also, I've got listener feedback, so stay tuned. Welcome to episode 19 of the Play Guitar Podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out or you've been playing for years, this is the show that'll help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. On today's episode, we're talking pedals, and more pedals. I love guitar pedals. They are such fun. Get a few well-researched pedals, and they can take your playing to new heights. They can take your regular guitar and amp sound and supercharge it. I'm going to continue this series of episodes in the same way that I presented the last two, greatly generalizing them, especially with pedals. It's so easy to get trapped in this one does this, but that one does that, and the indecisive rut of picking them. I'm going to try to get away from that and give us a bird's eye view of a giant pedal board, really boiling them all down to their essentials. I've got my own opinions as to which ones are great and other ones not so much, but it never fails. I go out and I see another guitar player whose tone sounds great to me, and then I check out what they're using, and there you go, using the same pedal that I thought sounded terrible. So what do I know, right? Okay, so like I said, this is an overview, and I'm doing this for a reason. I like to get everyone on the same page with the basics of guitar pedals. This will give me a launching point to do more in-depth shows later on down the road, focusing on certain pedals with lots of sound clips and different uses for them. But for now, I just like to get the basic knowledge and uses down. There's a lot to this episode, and I want to keep it at a reasonable length. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So here it is, the path to understanding stomp boxes. Guitar pedals, the path to great tone, guitar tone, part 3. Guitar pedals, those funny, bright colored little boxes you see at the feet of your favorite guitar players. They're constantly stepping on one, then the other one, periodically bending down to adjust the settings. What are they, and why would you even need them? Having the right guitar and the right amp is quite a process. Some knowledge and trial and error helps you on your way to getting this equipment just the way you want. But when you get to the point that you have those things under control, you just might find that the sounds that you get from your guitar and amp, while they're awesome, they aren't enough. You may have an amp that's mainly designed to play clean, but what do you do when you need to play a song that requires a heavier sound? Or what do you do when you need to play a solo line with a lot of sustain? Do you run out, buy a whole new amp, and add it to your live rig? Let me tell you, when you start adding amps, and when you use a multi-amp setup, it can become very hard to carry and very complicated to set up. It's much easier and lighter to buy a few guitar pedals that can change your sound, plug them in line before they hit the amp, and you're good to go. Or maybe you have an amp that has a lot of distortion and it can go from clean to a mean sound, but you notice that your songs could use something else. Maybe some tremolo to add a different color, or maybe a wah-wah sound to attract some attention to a certain part of the song. There's so many reasons that you might need to add options to your standard tone. The best way to fill out your collection of go-to sounds is to have a few choice pedals at your feet. Just step on the pedal and your tone changes instantly. And how cool is that? But just like we found out in the last 2 episodes, the sheer amount of choices that you have when adding to your guitar gear, it makes things pretty difficult. You enter the gear rabbit hole. What pedals do I need to get these new sounds? What manufacturer makes the best one? How do I arrange the pedals to make them sound their best? And then you find out, okay, maybe I can't afford the best, but what pedals will get me those same sounds for a much cheaper price? And how am I going to power them? Do I need a pedal board? You see, it quickly gets overwhelming, but just like with guitars and amps, a little knowledge can make this all go so much easier. When you do find the right pedal for the job, who knows, that just might be the sound that defines your playing, your signature sound. I know it did for me. Before we get into the different types of pedals, I want to share an experience of mine. This is one time where a guitar pedal saved me from total embarrassment. Early on in my gig life, I was in a blues band and we played across the country a lot. I was basically a live player for the band. That's what I did. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of money, but I had just enough good gear to get the job done. I would travel to these gigs and I'd play through my Fender Vibrolux combo, and I had a Les Paul and I had a Strat. And that did it. I had also had several pedals, but my main overdrive pedal was a Tube Screamer. And that sounded great live, and it worked great for all of the blues songs that we were playing. So there was a period of time where we didn't have a lot of gigs, and I was home. I got a call to come down to the studio to put some guitar on some new songs. I said, sure. And when it was time, I packed up my equipment and I headed down to the studio. We had rehearsed these songs, and we played them on a few of the recent gigs we had. So the recording, the parts of them, that was fine. I didn't have a problem with that. But here comes the last song. And I was asked to play a slide solo. And for some reason, playing this part with my Fender amp and my Tube Screamer, it just wasn't getting the vibe that worked for the song. We felt it needed more of a driven Marshall type tone. And that wasn't coming out of the gear that I had. So I struggled. I started adjusting settings on my amps and the pedals, and we tried everything, and nothing really worked. And this was at the end of the session. And so we decided we'll just break and we'll start back up the next day. And I thought, awesome. This will give me some time to work on my sound and come up with something that should work good by tomorrow. So I went home and I got right to it. I got out all of my old gear and I started trying new things. I put my Fender amp into another speaker cabinet, see if that worked better. I tried different overdrive pedals, anything that I could try, I tried. And I did it all, and I kept it at it for most of the night anyway, but nothing worked. So finally I was going through the last box of old pedals I had, and I found an old Boss DS1 distortion. And I had bought that years ago, and I think it was around $30 or something like that. And I had tried it with my old rig when I bought it, and I didn't really like the tone I was getting. So I put it aside and put it in the box, really, and I never used it again. At this point, I was getting a little worried. And I was trying anything I could to find a good slide tone. So I plugged in the DS1 to my clean Fender, and I kind of expected it to not work. I was expecting to be underwhelmed. And all of a sudden, there it was. That was the sound I was after. It had just the right amount of compression. It was very touch responsive, had a little bit of low end to it. When I reached down, I lowered the tone knob just a little bit, and it got better. And I couldn't believe it was working with this pedal that I had thrown in a box. I had written it off as a waste of money, really. So I raised the volume on the pedal. I lowered the gain a little bit more, and there it was. It was the perfect setting for the song that we were recording. So needless to say, I slept really good that night, and I woke up excited to go back. So we went back. I went back. The recording went great, and my parts made it on the final album, which is always good because you never know. And then I just went on with life. So a few months later, we were playing a private party, and it was in Kentucky, out in the middle. It was around a lake, and I remember there was a lot lake houses around and a lot of people on boats. And I was just sitting around waiting to play. And I was talking to some people. And on one of the pontoon boats that kind of was sitting out in the lake, they're having a party on the boat, and I could hear some music playing. And I hear this song, and it had a great slide tone. I said, hey, listen to that. And it took me a few seconds. But then I realized that was the track that we had recorded just a few months earlier. I hadn't heard it yet. And I remember the big smile that was on my face the whole rest of the day, knowing that for a few seconds, I didn't recognize my own playing, and I thought it sounded good. And it was all because of that $30 pedal. I got lucky that time. If I had had a little more knowledge about the pedals that I already had, I would have saved myself a very stressful time. And since then, I've spent a lot of time researching and experimenting with pedals, and so much so that I've found the right combination of my guitar that I like, my guitar pickups that I like, the pedals I like, the amplifier that works for me, and the speakers for that amplifier, and to get my own sound. So let's go ahead and start looking at the different types of guitar pedals that could help you get the sound that you want, and hopefully without spending a whole lot of cash. By far, the two questions that I get the most when it comes to pedals are, what are they used for, and what order do you put them in? Those are the two big questions, and they're great questions. And I thought today I'd try to take a shot at answering them both at the same time. So I'm going to hit the main types of pedals, but I'm going to try to do it in the order of the way they should go in your pedal board, at least one way that they should go, the common way of placing them on your pedal board. Now, this is going to be geared towards the player that uses his or her pedals into the front of a clean or a slightly broken up crunchy amp. The other way that's commonly used is to have a high gain amp, and then you get all your distortion from the amp. And then you would put the delays and your choruses and reverb pedals, put those all into the effects loop so that they come after the distortion that's created by the preamp of the amp. It's really the same principle as what we're going to get into today. It's just that instead of having the overdrive and distortion come from pedals, they come from the amp. So everything that we talk about today that comes before the distortion pedals, you would put in front of a high gain amp. And everything that we show that I talk about today that comes after the distortion pedals, they would go into the effects loop of a high gain amp. That's what's going to be. That's how you could translate what we're going to talk about into that other situation. Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this. The first type of pedal that I'm going to talk about today is the tuner. Yes, the tuner, the most important pedal by far. Keeping yourself in tune is so very important. For years, I kept the Boss TU2 tuner at the front of my pedal board. Why? It's not just because it was a good tuner and that you could easily see it in a bright sunlight, which is awesome, but because when you stepped on it, it muted your signal. And you don't know how important that was for me. Mostly for when I wanted to switch guitars. That way you didn't have to deal with that huge pop that comes when you pull out your guitar cable. I could press down the pedal, unplug my guitar, plug another guitar in, give it a quick tune, and all without causing a big distraction on stage. A lot of folks use those Snark type clip-on tuners now, and they work great. They tune without having to turn your guitar up. But not being able to mute your signal, that's a deal breaker for me. I need that. Also, I've had the unfortunate problem of turning very fast on stage, and I watched my Snark type tuner just sail across the stage, and that is not fun at all. A lot of lists will put the tuner in the pitch type pedal category, and yes, it does deal with the pitch of the guitar, but I consider it more of a utility type pedal because it's not really dealing with pitch in a way that transforms the pitch. Well, the tuner's it's a great pedal to plug into first on your board. And also pedals like the TU2 that I use, you can also power your other pedals from that pedal. You can get a daisy chain adapter that goes from pedal to pedal to pedal to pedal. Very nice feature of that. You can also check out the TC Electronics Polytune pedals. I have one of those, and it works great as well. Let's move on. The next pedal that I'm going to talk about are the filter type pedals, the wah-wahs, EQ pedals, envelope filters. They're all the common guitar filter effects. And these boxes deal with the manipulation of certain frequencies of the guitar signal to give you whole new sounds. The reason I put these next in the chain after the tuner in the chain of the pedal board is primarily because of the wah pedal. The wah-wah pedal likes to live in front of the overdrive and distortion pedals. And the wah-wah pedal does just what the name implies. It gives a vowel-like vocal type sound to your guitar signal. What it does is the pedal sweeps through frequencies, and they give you everything from high-pitched nasal sound all the way forward, and if you go all the way back, it gives you a low-pitched muffled sound. They sound awesome, and you can hear them on countless recordings. And common wah-wah pedals are the Dunlop Crybaby Wah, and also the Fulltone Clyde, which is the one I use. Although I've got both, but I use the Fulltone the most. Okay, let's move on to the next. That's the EQ pedal, and it functions just like any equalizer you'd have in like a computer program or the old type graphic EQs. It boosts or cuts different frequencies to change your guitar signal. If you need some more highs, you just find that frequency and push the lever up. If you have too many lows in your sound, you can find that frequency and pull that lever down. I've used EQ pedals for years, especially for recording when you want your sound to be just right. You can also put the EQ pretty much anywhere in the pedal board that sounds good to you. It doesn't have to be up front like the wah-wah pedal. I love the way John Scofield uses his EQ pedal. His sound, he uses a semi-hollow humbucker guitar into a Vox amp. That's kind of his go-to stuff. And that is usually a nice fat tone. But sometimes when he wants a funky sound, a sharper kind of sound, he'll set his EQ pedal with the lows cut, the lows down, and some highs boosted. And it sounds to me like a Telecaster type sound. And that gives him a nice funky sound. And all he has to do to get back to his regular sound is just turn off the EQ pedal, stomp on it. So that's a cool way out. I really like how John Scofield uses that. The Boss GE7 style EQs are great. But I've also used the little Danelectro fission chips, and it works very well too. So there's two for you there. The next filter is the envelope filter, and it's very similar to the wah pedal. Some actually call it an auto wah. It's kind of like using a wah pedal with the pedal that automatically goes back and forth by itself. Kind of spooky. But I don't have a lot of experience with this type of pedal. I don't use those very much. But the one that I see that most players use, I see it a lot, is the Electro Harmonix Qtron. Okay, so let's move over now to the next position on our imaginary pedal board. And this is gain type pedals. Give us some gain. These pedals help you get the sounds out of that you like of overdriven guitar amps, but at reasonable volumes. And just as we saw before, just different types of distortions from the amps sounds that you currently have. The first type of gain pedals we're going to talk about are overdrive pedals. Overdrive pedals are made to simulate an amp that's pushed to the edge, that's turned up so loud that the tubes are starting to break up a bit. And this is a very cool sound. But to get this sound from a classic amp, it's going to have to be really, really loud. So putting an overdrive pedal in front of your reasonably loud, amp, it can give it the sound of a cranked amp without being too loud for the gig. Why would you want your sound to sound like an amp that's cranked up? One of the benefits from these cranked up amps, it's increased sustain. You'll find that overdrive adds a lot of sustain to your playing, and it really helps, especially with single note playing. They also sound great in front of an amp that's already on the edge of breakup. This is another way to use them. They can push these amps into some really great heavier sounds just with the tap of the switch. Let's see. The most popular overdrive pedal is the Ibanez Tube Screamer, and all of it, it has a lot of different models of the Tube Screamer. It has a big push in the mid-range that really helps when you use a Fender amp, because Fender amps are kind of scooped, especially the Blackface amps. They don't have a whole lot of mid-range. And so what happens is when you turn that Tube Screamer on, it actually pushes a lot of extra mid-range in there. It makes it sound nice and full. Stevie Ray Vaughan's early lead guitar tone came from the Ibanez TS-808, and it was awesome. The Ibanez Tube Screamer is also used by a lot of metal players, and they put them in front of high gain amps. So why would you think that would work? Well, it's because the pedal doesn't have a whole lot of lows to it. It can really tighten up the bass on a high gain amp. It helps you with the tone of and it also helps you with palm muting when you're doing that low chugging kind of sound. So other overdrive pedals that you can use other than the Tube Screamer are like the Boss SD1, the Boss OD3, the Exotic BB preamp, which is the one I really like, and also the Full Tone OCD. They're all very common and they perform the same task, but they each have a little bit different type of a drive sound. Another way that overdrive pedals are used, they can be used as a boost pedal. If you turn the drive down on the pedal but turn the volume up, the signal from your guitar gets amplified without adding that simulated breakup sound. This will put much more volume into the amp, and it can push the amp over the edge. I noticed early on the difference between my Stratocasters and my Les Pauls when I plugged them straight into the amp. The humbuckers of a Les Paul, they give a lot more volume into the amp than the Strat single coils do. If I set the amp to clean for the Strat, if I went ahead and unplugged that and plugged in a Les Paul, it would start to distort the amp a little bit. And using an overdrive pedal as a boost can bring that Strat up to the volume of a Les Paul, and you can get a lot more sustain out of a Stratocaster. There are pedals that are designed to do just this without being an overdrive pedal. They're called boost pedals. And you usually see them with just one knob. It's just a clean sounding boost. And they've been around for a while. I always remember seeing the MXR Micro Amp as a little white pedal with one big black knob on it. But there are many more boost pedals in production now, and they're used a lot. My favorite is the Exotic EP Booster right now. I like to put that one before my other overdrive pedals, and it gives them a really nice push when I want a lead sound. But you don't have to put them there. You can put them at any place in your pedal chain that you want. Okay, it doesn't stop there. Let's get a little bit heavier with our gain pedals. Let's talk distortion. Distortion pedals. These are overdrive pedals times 10. They're designed to give massive distortion with tons of crunch and a lot of sustain. The classic ones were the Proco Rat pedal and the Boss DS1. But these days, those are kind of tame in comparison with the distortion pedals that are available today. They're generally used mostly for that simulated high gain sound, not so much as overdrive. As a boost, like the overdrive was. They also add crunch and add harmonics to your tone. So some examples, check out the MXR full bore metal pedal and also the Electro-Harmonix metal muff. And you'll get tons of metal goodness from those pedals. And last but not least in our gain pedal category, it's the fuzz type pedals. Think Jimi Hendrix on this one. They give a very different type of distortion than overdrive and distortion pedals. They were very popular in the 60s and they're always associated with that style of music. Fuzz pedals are great, and I've owned a few, and they're one thing about them, they're very tricky to use though. Most of them don't like to, you can't put them in different places on your pedal board. A lot of them like to be the very first pedal in your pedal board, and that's where they sound their best. They can also get overheated, and all of a sudden your tone starts to change if you're in a different temperature. But when you get it just right, fuzz tone is awesome. They also feel a little bit different to your picking too. It's a whole different animal than the other types of pedals. They're a little tougher to pick than a distortion. They kind of fight back a little bit more. But the Dunlop Fuzz Face is a classic fuzz pedal. But I also like the Fulltone 69 a lot. The next pedal that you might put on your board is a compressor pedal. Compressor pedals limit the dynamic range of your guitar signal, and that means they make the loud parts quieter and the quiet parts louder. They squash the signal. The goal of the pedal is to give you an even volume without too many peaks or dips. This gives a guitar player extra sustain, which is always a good thing. Compressor pedals are common with country guitar players. It gives them that certain fullness to their clean sound that sounds great. You can also hear compressors used by classic rock players like David Gilmour, and it just adds a lot of sustain to your lead lines. If you put a compressor before your overdrive pedals, it gives them a nice full signal to distort. But if you put a compressor after the overdrive, it affects it in a different way. The distortion itself will now be volume controlled. It's not going to be too quiet, and it's not going to be too loud. Very even sounding. I happen to like the dynamics of distortion pedals on their own. I think they already have a little bit of compression in them, which for my style playing is enough for me. I don't use compression very often when I'm playing live. But the classic guitar pedal compressor it's the Dynacomp, the Dunlop Dynacomp. But you'll see the Keeley compressor a lot. That's used a lot lately. All right, on to the next pedal in the chain. Now that we have our tuner, our wah pedal, our boost and overdrive pedals, and a compressor, it's time for some modulation pedals. Some pedals that take the basic tone that we've made and they change something to add a different dimension to your sound. Different types of modulation pedals are chorus, vibrato, flanger, and phaser pedals. These are pedals that put the effect in effect pedals. You'll really hear this stuff. You'll generally hear them very well. The sound is intended to stand out, and they're usually used after the overdrive pedals. That's not always the rule, though. Experimenting with the placement of the modulation pedals can give you some really cool and different sounds. Let's start with the chorus pedal. The chorus pedal is used to make your guitar playing sound like there's more than one person playing it. This is done by making a copy of your guitar signal, playing them together, and manipulating one of the two signals. The signal can be shifted in pitch, or it can be delayed a little bit. And depending on the setting you use, it can just sound thicker, or in extreme cases, it'll sound like it's underwater. This effect was huge in the 80s, and it's still used today. How about the vibrato pedal? The vibrato pedal is very... the Boss CE1, that's the classic pedal for that. I don't think you can get that anymore. They have a lot of different versions of that now. The vibrato pedal, it's very similar to the chorus pedal, but the difference is that It doesn't make a copy of your sound and play them both together. This pedal just uses the original signal, and it just raises or lowers the pitch. And you can adjust the speed of this raising and lowering, giving it a fast, shimmery type of sound, or then a slow, swirling sound. Vibrato sounds best to me after the gain pedals. But as with all of these, there's no real right and wrong answer. Try putting it first and see what kind of sound you get. You just might find one of your own signature sounds that way. The classic vibrato pedal that I've seen the most, it's the Boss VB2. It says vibrato right across the pedal. But there's tons of other ones that get the job done. Take a look at the TC Electronics Shaker. And there's also that the Diamond Vibrato. They're both really cool pedals, and they have plenty of options to really sculpt your vibrato tone. The tremolo pedal is also very similar to the vibrato pedal. In fact, people get them confused a lot. Where the vibrato pedal shifts the pitch, the tremolo pedal, the way it's modulated, it uses the actual volume of the pitch. This kind of effect was included inside many Fender amps in the 60s. So you have the volume, it drops every so often, and you can speed up and slow down the effect. It's very popular in the 60s and 70s and still used today. And you can check out the Boss TR2 and also the Electronic Pipeline. So let's see here. Flanger. Okay, here we go. So another widely used modulation pedal is the flanger. And this is so cool. It's heard in so many classic recordings. It's often described as like a swoosh of a jet plane sound. Listen to Unchained from Van Halen to hear the very distinctive sound of a flanger. It's similar to a chorus in the way it works, because they make a copy of original signal and play them both back together. But instead of shifting the pitch like the chorus, the flanger offsets one of the signals. One is just slightly out of time than the other one. Then that offset is sped up and slowed down. And when you do that, it gives that whooshing kind of sound that goes up, climbs up, and goes down. The MXR M117 or M117 is one of the classic flangers. And that's the one Eddie Van Halen used to get that sound of Unchained. Also, the Boss BF3 and the Electro Harmonix Electric Mistress are also other great flangers. All right, on to the phaser. The phaser pedal, like the chorus and like the flanger, also makes a copy of the original guitar signal and plays them alongside of each other. But this time, its copy is affected in phase by several filters. The phase copy is shifted smoothly in and out of phase with the original signal. When it's in phase, it's heard with the original signal. As it moves from all points in between the in and out of phase, it creates the classic sound of a phaser as it moves in and out of phase. Listen to Ain't Talking About Love from Van Halen for an example of classic phaser tone. He used the MXR Phase 90. But you can also check out some other ones. Check out the TC Electronic Helix and the Electro Harmonix Small Stone phase shifter. Try experimenting with placement with these as well. I like them just about anywhere you put these. Phasers always sound good pretty much anywhere you put them. So let's talk about the Univibe. No guitar pedal show should ever forget the mighty Univibe. The Univibe was used by Jimi Hendrix and Robin Trower, who's still playing today. And it's a little bit different take on the phaser and the chorus pedal. It uses photocells to achieve the Univibe effect. And you can definitely hear when you listen to it the sounds of both a chorus pedal and a phaser pedal mixed together to give you that classic tone. It also sounds good in different places on your pedal chain. I like it before my overdrives, but your opinion could be completely different. Check out the Dunlop Univibe and the Full Tone Deja Vibe, and also the Voodoo Lab Microvibe. I've owned I've had the Deja Vibe and the Micro Vibe, and they were both really awesome. Okay, so let's move on to pitch bass effects. It's really a toss up for me. Which one would go first between the modulation effects and the pitch bass effects? You could put them one in front of the other. Really doesn't matter. Some of the pitch pedals sound great in the front of your pedal board, but this is definitely a place for experimentation. Pitch shifting pedals are just fun. No matter if you have one that has just an octave below your original signal, or one that puts a fifth above your whatever you're playing, they sound great and they make guitar playing a lot of fun. You wouldn't want to play them in every song, but when they're on, the guitar sound just fills out and it stands out. There are several types of pitch shift pedals. There's an octave pedal, the Octavia, the harmonizer pedals, the tremolo pedal is a pitch shifting pedal, and also the whammy pedal. The first three, they just do varying ways of changing the note you're playing into a note a certain interval away. But generally, your original signal is left in there, so when you add that pitch shifted note in, it gives you the effect of two instruments harmonizing. Ones to check out are the Digitech Whammy, the Boss Harmonist, Roger Mayer Octavia, and the Mooer Pitchbox. Those are good examples of pitch bass effects. Next, we're moving to time bass effects as we go through our imaginary pedal board. These are the ones that everybody loves, and they are namely delay and reverb. Delay and reverb. What they do is they use copies of your guitar signal again, and they move the copy back in time. These effects simulate the sound of a room or a large space. It simulates the time it takes for your sound to hit a wall and then for it to bounce back to you. The larger the delay between the signals, the bigger the perceived room. And delay is generally just one copy of your guitar signal. But reverb is many, many copies of the signal, and they give more of a sense of space. You can think of delay as the slapback sound off of a certain wall that's near. You know, if you clap your hands and you hear it come right back to you. But you can think of reverb as the sound of the room as a whole, and that's as the sound bounces all around the room. Playing guitar without some sort of delay or reverb is tough. The guitar will sound very dry and lifeless. That sense of space is very pleasing to the ear, and it doesn't feel like the guitar amp is being played right up on your ear. A lot of amps have reverb already built in. So why would you want to have a reverb pedal? I know for me, it was from necessity. When I would play out of town, a lot of times I would have to use an amp that was provided at the venue. I wasn't able to use my own amp. And the reverb from that amp may not sound the way that I was used to. So it was easier for me to turn it off and use a pedal that I know would sound good to me. Also, a lot of amps use spring reverb, actual springs. And if they are moved real suddenly, they give off a terrible crashing sound. If you've ever heard that sound of spring reverb crashing, you won't forget it. Well, if you're on a stage that isn't very solid, that bounces around a bit, it will make those springs crash. And believe me, that's the last thing you want when you're in mid-song. But the reverb pedal, it won't crash. But I remember, I think there was a Dane Electro reverb pedal. It had a special switch that had a reverb crash sound, if for some reason you were missing that sound. Some great reverb pedals are the TC Nova Reverb, the TC Hall of Fame, the Strymon Blue Sky, and the Boss RV6. Delay pedals are heard a lot with lead guitar players and also ambient style players. The immediate big sense of space that it's very pleasing to both those styles. You can think of the Edge from U2 and Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd. They've both used a delay pedal. It's part of their signature sound. And analog delay pedals have a duller repeat sound. As it repeats, it gets duller and duller. And that blends in more with the rest of the music. Whereas digital delays, the other kind, they generally have very clear repeats and they stand out a little bit more. It's up to you. It's up to the player which one works for you the best. I find myself using digital delays a lot and they sound great to me. Some examples of delay pedals are the Boss DD3 and the DD7, the TC Electronic flashback delay, and also the MXR carbon copy. Okay, that's a lot of pedals. But there's one more I would like to bring up before I finish. The looper pedal. This is one of my favorite pedals, and it's changed the way a lot of guitarists play and practice. It's basically a digital recorder that you can operate with your feet. It's awesome to create a quick background track if you just want to practice some of your soloing over, or you can also layer some sounds over and over again to make some awesome ambient layers. Some players will even ditch a band altogether and just make loops by themselves to play their songs. Looper pedals are a lot of fun, and I highly suggest that you try one out. They're generally placed last in the effects chain so that all of your pedals make it to that recording that it's looping over and over again. Check out the TC Electronic Ditto, the Pigtronics Infinity, and the Boss RC series. I've used all of those, and they all work great. Well, that's it. That's my general look at effects pedals. I've gone through all the main types and some examples of each of those. But remember, this is by no means a complete list. I just wanted to do a wide overview of what you're in for if you're starting to get into pedals. Hopefully this will save you some time and money by being well informed as to what you want and the sounds that you're interested in adding to your guitar tone. My question for you is, what's been your experience with guitar effects pedals? Have they been helpful to you? Or are you still struggling to find the right ones for the sound that you're looking for? Let us all know in the show notes over at www.playguitarpodcast.com/019. This is listener feedback. This is where if you have a comment or question that I can help you with, I will try my best to help you. To get in touch, you can always email me at feedback@playguitarpodcast.com, or you could use the comments on the show notes page, or you could use the contact form on the site, and you can even use my SpeakPipe voicemail on the main page of playguitarpodcast.com. It's to the right of the screen. It'll say send voicemail. You click it, record a message. I get it. I can use it on the show. This has been a wonderful week. A lot of cool stuff, but I really want to thank Carlos, my friend Carlos on Twitter. I want to thank you for tweeting out I'm a fan of the Play Guitar podcast. And what's your favorite guitar podcast tweet that you sent out? It was awesome. It made my whole day. I sure appreciate it. Thanks, Carlo. You're the best. I'd also like to thank Spotify Ideas on Twitter as well. There was a cool tweet that I saw, and it was asking folks to check out the podcast. Spotify has quickly become the place that this show gets the most listeners from. And how cool is that? I've heard from other podcasters that Spotify is just a smaller percentage of their total listeners, but not for me. It's awesome. And thanks to the folks like Spotify Ideas on Twitter for the help in bringing new listeners to the show. I want to thank you. Also, a very big thank you to Pat Flynn this weekend. If you remember a while ago, I was fortunate enough to be one of the winners of a contest that Pat held for his YouTube page. Pat's the host of the Smart Passive Income podcast, and he is just an all-around great guy. So I was fortunate enough to have my meeting with him this week on Skype, and it was a lot of fun. And he even brought his guitar. We did some playing. So how cool is that? So thanks again, Pat. I just want to let you know how much I really appreciate your time. Okay, I got a wonderful email this week from Christopher, all the way from Tasmania. Thank you so much, Chris, for the message and all the kind words. He also sent along a link to a clip of one of his solos that he created, and I got to check it out, and it was awesome. Great job, Chris. He was also playing a Carvin electric guitar that reminded me of one of my old guitars. I had a guitar almost exactly like that. It was great to hear from you, Chris, and good job on your guitar solo. And also, I got to talk to Chris from UK again, and we've been back and forth talking about gear. And I hope you all have been talking about gear and thinking about gear. I've spent the past 3 weeks I've been doing a lot of generalizing, but I'm kind of opening up some of these ideas and trying to give you some knowledge about really getting a handle on this gear stuff. So I think next week, I think I'm going to go back into some guitar playing things, but I'm not done with this by far. I've got a lot of things that I want to get to about gear, and I wanted to do some clips and show you some different stuff. So that's coming in the future. But I think next week we're going to go ahead and get back to some playing type stuff. Okay, so that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave an iTunes review for the show. If you're interested in online lessons, go on over to playguitaracademy.com and join my early adopter list to get news on the opening of the site and an early adopter discount. Also, follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at www.playguitarpodcast.com. Thank you again, and I'll see you on the next episode.